Hi, everybody, and welcome to the colloquium for today. I'm going to introduce Wilson Zaire. Wilson joined the faculty of the College of Business at Eastern Oregon University in 2015. He brings experience teaching innovation, entrepreneurship, marketing, business strategy, and finance. Other universities he has taught at include Northeastern University in Boston, Oregon State University in Corvallis, Concordia University in Portland, and Portland State University in Houston, Texas. There's people listening. Marylhurst University in Lake Oswego and
Chulalongkorn University.
in Bangkok, Thailand. Yes. Wilson is an Energizer bunny. And, as evidence, he is currently completing his PhD in management at Walden. Additional education includes a PhD ABD in engineering and technology, a PhD ABD in system science, an MBA, and a BS in finance, computer science minor, all from Portland State. Is that the Houston one or the Portland one?
Yeah, either works. Yeah.
Wilson's career in industry spans more than 20 years in technology and telecom. He started as a software engineer, then moved into full lifecycle product marketing, program management, strategic alliances, and executive leadership. Wilson is also a serial, so tempting. Entrepreneur who has participated in or started 8 technology startups and performed consulting work for dozens of other successful, according to him, early stage companies.
Yeah.
His research interests include market-based innovation, strategic marketing, global competitiveness, and business strategy. So I guess before I pass this on to Wilson, I think that if there is a big burning question, feel free, but by and large, having talked with Wilson over the last couple of years, I know that we probably want to leave questions to the end. Okay, so we can finish before tomorrow. So, thank you, Wilson.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Someday I'll get to return the favor, I'm sure. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. I mean, I was telling Peter, as I was saying, well, I'm a little nervous. You never know. I present in front of classes every day. He says, don't worry about it. Maybe nobody will even come. Okay. That's an option. All right. So the material I have today is based on market-based innovation. And it's derived in part from a presentation I gave at a conference this summer. I presented at the Portland International Conference for Management of Engineering and Technology. So international conference that alternates between Portland, Oregon, and international destinations. So because it's sponsored by the School of Engineering, innovation is a hot topic. But in particular, people like to talk about technological innovation in the School of Engineering. But let's just talk about the definition first of all. Innovation, this comes from Van den Ven. Innovation is defined as the development and implementation of new ideas by people who over time engage in transactions with others in an institutional order. So you think, is that pretty clear? It's as squishy as most of the other stuff that you find in the literature today. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think people worry that they're going to leave something out on accident, so it tends to be a little loose. Certainly not a legal definition. So the important thing here is that when we think about innovation, we talk about invention, which is the creation of the idea, and innovation, which really requires commercialization. You need to be able to monetize it or be able to use it in a commercial setting before it becomes an innovation. And then, of course, there's imitation as people adapt that idea and use it in different ways. This particular study started out in an engineering class where a I was asked to come up with this innovative idea. And so one of the interesting things is that, well, it's interesting for me anyway, is I really like to cook, but I'm also incredibly cheap. And so I end up driving all over town to get the things I wanted, but, get specialized ingredients, but get them at a really inexpensive price. And I got sick of that. So one of the things I thought about doing was creating an app that would allow me to, would shop for prices automatically and be able to do the routing automatically. And I thought, well, even that's too hard. Why wouldn't I just make another grocery store? I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, I know how to do that. So I looked out there at the marketplace first and mapped out the offerings. This model here is called a natural selection model. And it's a model I created to look at the computer industry, but I decided to use it with the grocery stores. The basic idea is that volume drives reduction in cost, so you can have a very complete solution and a price of the solution. Typically, very complete solutions tend to be more expensive than less complete solutions. In this model, anytime you get to a point below a competitor, they essentially go away. And actually, this is not a bad call, because if you look at the news today, Safeway and Albertsons are together, right? They've been acquired, so not a bad placement. And this was 2010. I originally put this original model together. So this, and so what I did is I said, well, why don't I just do something that's right about there? I'll have something that has a broader selection, it'll have low costs, and I won't have to drive over town. I can just get everything I want in one place. And in class, they just said, well, but that's cool. I would go to that store, but that's not innovative. So, well, why not? Well, where's the engineering? Where's the code? Where's the new device? I said, well, that's not the only way to be innovative. I mean, innovative is all about new ideas and new ways of doing business. So in this case, this idea takes two things. One is it takes segmentation, because these stores, Costco and Winco, have a certain format. Because of the format they use, 50,000 plus square feet, they require a certain level of population. Otherwise, their business model doesn't work. So if you were to take that concept and plug it into a smaller community and then work out an agreement, strategic alliance with these folks, you could bring in product at cheaper prices based on their pricing agreements, and they would get to service markets that they wouldn't otherwise get to service. So win-win based on segmentation and strategic alliances. So we'll come back to how strategy plays into that. And people are like, all right, yeah, okay, I can kind of see that. So let's talk about the framework for a minute that we're using to look at in the engineering, from an engineering standpoint or from a technology standpoint, in terms of innovation. The idea of innovation, well, innovation's been around for hundreds of years, probably. I mean, somebody discovered fire, right? So that was maybe even longer than that. But if we look at it in the literature, really Schumpeter started talking about it. Schumpeter pioneered the idea in economics in the 30s, Austrian-American economist, and really the idea of creative destruction. So through innovation, we destroy the new, destroy the old, create new, and because of that, our economy can grow and advance. So it's a really healthy process that allows things to grow. In the 70s, Friedman really changed that focus from just thinking of innovation as a economic variable to one that we can influence through R&D, working on process, working on products, so we can use it as a competitive advantage. And then Rogers in the 60s came up with this model where it's looking at diffusion of innovations. This model is used all over the place to, in lots of different disciplines to explain how a new innovation, is adopted by a larger population. That brings the idea that Christensen brought out in 1997, where you talk about disruptive innovation. The idea, these S-curves are signify innovation. You'll start with a new idea, you'll do, which is, a new innovation, and then incremental innovation as the ideas move up the curve. When you get a new idea, a disruptive innovation, then it's usually a movement to another S-curve. Typically, that's illustrated by a pattern of new entrants with different kinds of offering that tends to coalesce around a dominant platform, and then that dominant platform continues to evolve with incremental innovation. The reason why this is so interesting is that what Christensen's research shows is that the old technology curve tends to favor the incumbent, the firm that's already in the industry, whereas the new disruptive curve tends to favor new entrants, right? So if you think about, the cell phone industry, you've got Nokia, and maybe BlackBerry had, a smartphone-like device in the business environment, but then Apple kind of disrupted in the consumer marketplace. And where's Nokia these days, right? So the incumbent just kind of falls behind unless they're smart enough to keep up. And there's a lot of work right now going on in terms of what does it take to anticipate that and get out in front of it if you are an incumbent. But typically, the lower curve tends to favor new entrants. The other thing is this model. It's called the AU model. It's Utterback and Abernathy. Honestly, it was so funny because I went to this conference in Portland I mentioned this summer, and James Utterback, who invented this from MIT, was at the conference. Actually, I got him to sign my book. Felt like I was at a rock concert. Sign my T-shirt. But that was kind of cool, especially since I'm doing some work on this model right now. But anyway, the idea is that we've always thought in terms of product innovation, technological-oriented product innovation, if you look at the literature. And then we started to look at the idea of process innovation. So the idea being that when a product is new, we're creating the offering of the device, but as it begins to mature and the market gets more competitive, then we tend to transition to process-based innovation so we can make it more efficiently. And so they went out and measured, looked at hundreds of firms, and created this diagram that shows that people start out with product innovation, and then they tend to focus on process innovation. In the 90s, you guys probably saw Geoffrey Moore in his Crossing the Chasm. Basic idea is, an extension to Roger's idea that from a marketing standpoint, there's a chasm that usually makes it so that it's very difficult to get people to adopt on a broad basis. So this is, if we think about this model, for 25 years, this is kind of the way it looked. People talk about product innovation, they talk about process innovation, and this dynamic in the marketplace. Then, just probably about 1995, we had something else happen. In 1995, the internet browser was launched. The internet, or the World Wide Web, took off. And does everybody remember people talking about the new economy? Right? There were billions, tens of billions of dollars thrown at this marketplace, and everybody was going to create some new reality. And so if we look at the literature, we could see that starting in about 1995, these are non-academic journals are the gray ones, academic journals are the black ones. We can see this explosion in people writing about business model innovation, right, as interest sparks around this. And we start to see a lot of different models around business model innovation. What is a business model? What does it look like? But one of the things you find when you read through the literature is there just really isn't any general agreement on even what a business model is, let alone what components are in it. And I've read, half a dozen articles that reach the same conclusion. There really just is no consensus, which makes it kind of difficult when you're trying to classify this stuff. Go ahead. Yeah.
Does that mean that there's a cluster of ideas that are defined as things that are defined as business model, and
Yeah, and a business model, I mean, some people define it as a process. You know, it's a series of steps. You could look at you can look at your resource model, your supply chain. You can look at your operating model. You can look at your revenue model or your marketing model or some combination of those things. And kind of depending on people's orientation, where they come from and the way they look at the business environment, they have a completely different perception of what a business model is. It's like that old picture. It's like the old picture of the monks, right, touching an elephant. Ever seen that, the blind monks? And depending on which part of the elephant they're touching, they have a completely different idea of what an elephant really is. The one thing that has happened is this model, this business model Canvas, is showing up on campuses across the country. It has been for the last 10 years in terms of entrepreneurship. People are using this model to try to define new businesses and really use it in conjunction with agile technologies. So you kind of define the pieces and then you try it and see if it works. And if it doesn't, you do something called a pivot. So you'll change pieces and try and come up with something that does work. And you know, the main goal is to either just to get it on one page, but also to make it so you don't have to write a business plan. Unfortunately, business plans are a really good idea. So most successful ventures actually take that next step. But I mean, you do see the business model template in a lot of contexts these days, even though there's no agreement on what a business model is. There are other extensions as people start to look at other kinds of innovation. You know, once the model breaks down, people start looking at alternatives, then you start to see lots of different ideas. This is a piece by Idris Moti. He's done, you know, he looks at the traditional kinds of innovation at the bottom, adds application innovation, and a couple of more blocks on top. These days he's off to working on design thinking, which is just another variation, so which won't help clear things up, but it's pretty interesting stuff. This is a piece put together by the Doblin Group. You can see that they have even more forms of innovation that you could adopt. And then the new definition by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, who's supposed to be, you know, the worldwide expert on innovation. And they say an innovation is the implementation of a new or significantly improved product, good or service, or process, a new marketing method, or a new organizational method, or in business practices, workplace organization, or external relations, either new to the firm, new to the industry, or new to the world. So do we leave anything out? So I think we can probably agree that that maybe when we started out, you know, our view when we started out was too strict, and maybe this might be way too expansive, right? You know, I talked to somebody the other day who's working on a project looking at innovation, and they're implementing a new CRM system in a company. Not the first time ever, just replacing an existing CRM system with a new one, and that's innovation. Well, it's like, well, you didn't write the software, and you already had one of those, so how is that innovative? But at any rate, you can see where the dilemma might lie. So transition so that's the innovation background. So we can transition now to looking at how that might manifest itself in a marketing environment, which is what I spent a lot of my time or spent a lot of my career doing. In marketing, this is kind of what we focus on. We've got the marketing mix, product, people, price, place, promotion, and all based on, you know, all dependent on our brand and our strategy. And the way we do marketing is by developing a marketing mix by twisting the dials and figuring out what to focus on. Sure, we do work on products too. We teach a class here called, you know, Product Planning and Development, BA 454, where we take students through that process. We look at, you know, ideation and creating new product ideas, how we find them and develop them. But a lot of times in marketing, especially once this market has already, once we've started up that S-curve, we're going to have to find something else to be competitive, another way to, to outflank our competitors. In addition, we know from business strategy that what we'd like to be able to do is build our business strategy around core competencies. Core competencies are things that we are better at, so they're valuable, rare, difficult to replace, but they're things that we have that others don't have that are difficult to acquire or duplicate. And if we can build our strategy around core competencies, it becomes very difficult for people to shake us down. So if we do this, then we could look at the marketing model and say, the premise is, there's a lot more going on here than just technological innovation or technology innovation. I can actually implement along any vector in the marketing mix. So, and there are some companies that tend to focus on that. So if you look at Apple, is what we would call product innovation, or what I would call at this point. You can see, if you look at the numbers for Apple, in 2002, they were about 80% Mac computers. That was, Jobs came back in '97, and one of the first things he did is started working on a new product that rolled out in 2002, which was the iPod. iPod in conjunction with iTunes. And you could see that within 4 or 5 years, it became 40% of their revenues. That really rejuvenated Apple. Apple had been struggling in '97 when Jobs came back, they had less than 4% or about 4% market share. They started out, when the computer industry started out in 1975, or shortly thereafter, they were about 40% market share. And you could see as IBM introduced their PC, for the business marketplace in 1982, their market share rapidly declined, which is part of the reasons why Steve Jobs got the boot for a while. So he came back, created the iPod, and then you could see in 2007 they released the iPhone, and within 3 years, that's 30% of their revenues. At this point in time, what's really interesting is that this company, well, you tell me, what's the transition? What's different about this company in 2009? Well, yeah, based on these numbers, though, this is not a computer company. This is a consumer electronics company. So they continued to grow this. And interestingly enough, the Mac computer stayed about 3 or 4% market share for most of this period of time. But as the iPhone started gaining popularity, the Mac started coming back. It's 10, 12% market share right now, mainly because of the brand and the visibility, positive association. So I would say even though they're a product-oriented company in the Jobs era, right now they're pretty much living off brand preference, brand recognition. There's not a huge amount of technology happening. Well, that's not unmatched by the competitors, right? If you're just matching your competitors, it's not a competitive advantage, it's just parity. Let's take a look at people. McDonald's. McDonald's is a favorite one I like to use in marketing class. McDonald's is the largest, fast food restaurant in the world. You may or may not like their food, but the numbers would indicate that you probably eat there, even if you say you don't like their food, at least once in a while. They've got about 17% market share. They've got more stores than anybody. But how do they do that? Well, if you look at, one of the interesting things is that if you just look at commercials, you see that what people are pushing is food, right? Burger King, flame broiled. Wendy's, not frozen burgers, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not why people go to fast food restaurants. People don't go to fast food restaurants to get good food. They go to the fast food restaurants to get fast food that's, convenient and inexpensive. So trying to convince people that you have good food at a fast food restaurant is problematic. But McDonald's didn't have to do that because they figured out when they started out, they were just expanding the interstate highway system. We had the baby boomers were growing their families. Everybody's taking to the road, and they need a place to take their family that's affordable, predictable, clean. And so McDonald's kind of rode that wave. Somewhere along the line, which was great, it was a great thing for them. But somewhere along the line, they also figured out that they could be more successful if rather than selling food, they were selling fun. They sell fun to the kids. That's why they have a Happy Meal. That's why they have Ronald McDonald. That's why they've got those gyms. The parents would drive by, the kids would say, McDonald's, and so they would bring the whole family with them. And even today, McDonald's sometimes talks about food, but a lot of their commercials are more about the experience, the feeling. They have the one now, the challenge they're dealing with is what happened to that baby boomer audience. They grew up, right? So they have to retool the message for another generation, but you can see how they're trying to map adults to children. Their Super Bowl ad from 2 years ago did a really good job of doing that. But it's an interesting way of segmenting the market. So they said, we'll just look at the kids. We'll sell to the kids. Everybody else just come along for the ride. Southwest Airlines on price. We look at the airline industry. I don't know how many times has United gone bankrupt over the last 20 years? Many, right? Southwest Airlines has been, I think there's 1 year in 40 that they haven't been profitable. And the way they do this for this company is organized so that they can offer the cheapest possible product. If you look at Southwest Airlines, they don't fly out of first-tier airports. They don't fly out of San Francisco. They fly out of San Jose and Oakland. They use, because the gates are cheaper and they can turn them faster. They use one model of airplane. That way they need one set of spares, and then pilots only need to be qualified on one plane. They have a limited set of routes. They encourage that they're non-union. They encourage the hiring of family and friends. If you look at the way the airline is organized, it's all organized to find the cheapest possible price. The reason why is because their target audience is consumers, and they want Southwest to be if you are planning on taking a family to grandma's house, Southwest wants to be a viable alternative to taking the car. And this has been a very successful strategy for them, and they were able to innovate in this way by designing a company to do that. Walmart, similar kind of concept, supply chain, and now they've got negotiating power. This is an interesting fact, you guys. Walmart, believe it or not, is the biggest company in the world. They have $500 billion in revenues. So something works, right? Now, of course, Amazon is going to try and whittle them down to size, but we'll see how that works out. In terms of place or channels, so you maybe have heard the story of Dell before, right? Dell, IBM launches the PC platform for businesses in 1982. Compaq is not far after that, as a less expensive alternative. Michael Dell in his dorm room says, hey, I can do this. I can make those things for really cheap. And guess what? If I put an ad in a magazine, people call me. I don't even have to buy any parts until I take a credit card. Right? People call on the phone. I take the order. I order the parts, charge their credit card. I don't have any inventory. I don't have any stuff floating out in the channel. And you can see how that worked out for them. In less than 10 years, it's a Fortune 500 company. And as the internet picked up speed, they were the first to adopt that as well. The other fringe benefit to going direct like this is not only do you eliminate material in the channel, can you do more lean manufacturing, but you have a direct connection to your customer. So you don't have the retailer in between, which means if you're shipping the wrong thing and somebody's unhappy with it, you know it today, and you can fix it, which is something that most vendors in this industry cannot do. The other thing is I'm only making what people want, right? I'm not blowing things out at the end of the season because I don't have anything on the shelves. I have Craigslist there because the innovation is the channel. This idea of we used to think about in terms of just B2C, B2B, business to consumer, business to business, and business to government or institutions. But now, because of tools like Craigslist, there's a viable C2C kind of market, consumer to consumer. So Craigslist, Etsy, eBay. So there's a bunch of those kind of companies. So it's just to illustrate the innovation. By the way, they are a business.
Yeah, but I think they made their money off of not innovating their site.
No, do you know how Craigslist makes money? How? Yeah, so the Craigslist guys, they figured out that if you think about the newspaper, right, regular newspaper, the way they make their money, the newspaper makes money is on advertising, of course, but the way they make most of their money is on help wanted ads. So on a Sunday, when you get that big fat paper and you take that section out of the middle, it has all those help wanted ads. That was, for most newspapers, that's a big piece of their support. So Craigslist said, I'm going to put all this stuff on free online, and you can do it free. You can put ads there free. You can buy and sell stuff. But if you want to put a want ad, you got to pay for it. And so they just cherry-picked all the want ads from the printed papers. And it turns out to be pretty lucrative. Yeah.
Repeat a question and then answer that. I'll be good.
All right. So any question, or you have one in mind? Okay. All right. Did that work? All right. I'm sorry, I'm rushing a little bit because I don't want to get behind. No, you're good. Unless Peter objects.
Just repeat the question.
All right. Now? No. Okay. Promotion. Here's the idea of Subway. Everybody remembers all those $5 footlong commercials? As goofy as commercials were, they were incredibly effective. I mean, if you look at their growth, they started out, believe it or not, they started out in 1965, still privately held, owned by this Doctors Associates. They're over $19 billion in revenue. But they started out in 1965. They had organic growth from 93 to 2001, about 140% growth in stores, 140% on a lot smaller base. In 2000 to 2008, they had Jared Fogle, the guy who lost all the weight on the Subway diet, and they still experienced about 60% growth. You can see it's down, but they're on a bigger base. During this $5 footlong commercial or period between 2007 and 2015, you could see their revenues grew 290%. They 53% growth on the stores, and it's on a huge base, a much bigger base. So that was wildly effective for them. And it was a different approach to the marketplace. They knew that they were the biggest, they had the lowest cost, they could promote it at $5, that $5 footlong, and blow them out the door, and guess what? It just blew Quiznos right out of the water, pushed them right into bankruptcy. So why don't they do this anymore? That's a great question. Mainly because the franchisees complain, the margins aren't fat enough. But this Eat Fresh, they've been struggling with that, and now they're closing stores and doing restructuring. They still haven't, got back into rhythm. But I think you'll see that at some point they say, oh, wait a minute, that worked pretty well. Maybe we ought to try that again. Brand, Intel Inside. How are we doing on time, Peter? Oh, there's right there. Got it. So Intel, when the PC industry was first getting started, there was, 8 or 10 microprocessor vendors in the marketplace, including Intel and Motorola and National Semiconductor and a bunch of folks like that. And one of the particular problems Intel had is that because they were in the computer And they really sold to, you know, if you're Intel, what you're doing is selling to Dell or HP or somebody trying to get the design win. You're not selling to the consumer. And they were really worried because they had people like A&D that were doing these knockoffs. And so they said, well, you know what we're going to do? We'll try something different. And even given this is the technology industry, what we'll do is we'll brand it. We'll put Intel inside on this. And for every person, for every vendor we work with who buys into you know, or who buys into our design and puts this on their box, we'll give them co-op advertising dollars. So we'll give them money. But as they spend the money, they of course reinforce the brand. So Intel, so they started this Intel Inside program in 1991. The other thing that happened is in 1994, they, with their products, they were calling them by the number. You know, they had 8088, 8188, 8286, 8386. But the problem is you can't trademark a number. So AMD was able to come back and do, we're 386 compatible, we're 486 compatible. So Intel also changed the name to Pentium, trademarked it. So you couldn't put Pentium compatible because you'd have to use the trademark name. So the combination of these two, by 2001, even though they're a technology product that